holding the mic, Stuart. Amy said the range is not that great.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. David, is there anybody else out to hustle out there? Well, that's fine. I'm just trying to get the crowd in here. Oh, here comes Steve and Sue. So, on Tuesday, it'll be Halloween. Tuesday, a lot of people don't realize is actually All Hallows Eve. And then on Wednesday, it'll be All Saints Day. So there must be, so like on Good Friday, what happens? Jesus dies. And then on Sunday, Easter Sunday, what happens? The resurrection. So that's kind of like what we celebrate. In ancient times, we used to celebrate a death that would take place on the 31st of October, and then we would celebrate a resurrection in our saints on the 1st. Hear me now, and believe me later. So I had this idea when we come together, Amy and I, about scheduling parables, trying to beat the bushes, because that's where we're at right now at the moment, beating the bushes, as to who hasn't come up and shared a story with us, or maybe who needs to come up and like suss out a story a little bit further, stretch it and push it and pull it a little bit further, because they gave us a great snippet and then they zipped their lips and moved on. And so we take those little snippets and try to get people to stretch them, push them, and pull them. Well, I was thinking that it would be great to hear Steve Davila, who I've been interrogating for the last like 6 weeks, like, you're going to be here, right? And you got a story, right? And so he's got a story for us. So we're going to hear Steve, and Steve's going to share, is it true or untrue? It is a true story that happened to Steve Davila, and then possibly we will hear from Jason Feltz, and he will share a story, and or any of you who are so inspired to share an All Hallows Eve story. Maybe something from the Great Pumpkin Patch. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, ex-CIA agent Steve Davila.
Oh my God, never an agent. That's very good. Thank you, Stuart. Apparently, though, I was in the bushes being beaten by Stuart, so here I am. So good morning. Good to see you all. I'm going to give you a story of sheer terror. That's a true story, but probably unlike any Halloween story you've heard. Right? Very different story. I've entitled this, and I have a script, because I have a lot of detail, and I didn't want to forget any of it, because the context is important. So the title of this story is Margaret and Steve's Halloween Nightmare, a horror story in 4 parts. Are you ready? Okay. Part 1, 2005 to 2007. The setting is North Lake Townhomes in Fairfax, Virginia. And as that title implies, Margaret and I lived in a Northern Virginia suburb of Washington, D.C. at that time, 2005, 2007. Specifically, the Fair Lakes area of Fairfax, Virginia, which happens to be the capital of Fairfax County, Virginia. Now, for, again, more context, Fairfax County is fairly large, but the population at that time was just under 1 million people, about half the size of the entire state of New Mexico at that time. So, the density of our population in that area was about 4,600 people per square mile. So my point is there was a lot of people in a relatively small area. Sprawling neighborhoods, apartments, townhomes, single-family homes. well-lit streets, street lights everywhere, good sidewalks. So the message there being, it's a very friendly area to foot traffic, which is important, of course, on Halloween. Halloween's in that area meant lots and lots of kids, starting from the late afternoon when folks got home from work. And they were mostly what I would call bedroom communities. People were commuting from there to D.C., and so they'd be getting back relatively late in the afternoon, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. From about that time, though, until a 9 p.m. curfew, and Margaret, I can't remember if that was imposed by Fairfax City or if that was our own informal curfew, where at 9 o'clock we said, done, shut off the lights, don't answer the door. But it was nonstop kid traffic up to that time. As a result, Margaret and I would typically have to buy 5 or 6 bags of individually wrapped candies to get through the night to 9 o'clock. And at times, we didn't make it. We'd have to shut down early because we were out of everything. It was just amazing. So that was the history. Now let's go to part 2, 2008, what I will call the preamble to our first Las Cruces Halloween. We moved into our rental home in the Pueblos of Alameda Ranch on Friday, 17 October 2008, 2 weeks to the day before Halloween 2008. We had very little prior knowledge of Las Cruces and its neighborhoods. We started working at a National Reconnaissance Office facility off of NASA Road. That's where a bunch of our colleagues were, and that's why we were sent out to this area in the first place. And if you have any questions about what the heck that's all about, I can answer them later. They're not relevant to this story. What is relevant, however, we were meeting our new colleagues, many of whom lived on this side of town, Sonoma Ranch and elsewhere, because it was very convenient to NASA Road, a really easy commute. Margaret used to love telling people back in D.C., who would then gnash their teeth, that her commute to work was 17 minutes every day. It didn't matter what time of day you went. That's unlike the Washington, D.C. area, for sure. None of those folks, however, lived in our immediate development, but they did live around, so we thought that was important. As we moved into our second week on the job, now we're into Halloween week, that Friday. The conversation, of course, naturally turned to the upcoming Halloween. We asked around what the Halloween was like in Las Cruces. We were regaled with stories of hordes of kids in constant streams during the prime trick-or-treat time, including carloads of kids who would be trucked up from Mexico and the surrounding rural areas of Doña Ana County, who would add to the high traffic volume. We took that to note. Part 3, Halloween night, 2008. Given our experience in Virginia and the Las Cruces stories we heard, we set about making preparations for a busy night. We were light on decorations, but we were heavy on treats, a lot of treats. We bought 6 bags of individually wrapped candies. We set up by the front door, and we waited for the hordes to arrive. Shortly after the dinner hour, the 2 children from our immediate neighbor, who lived like 2 lots to the east of us, came. They knocked on the door. We were delighted to see them in their costumes, give them the treats. We said, this is good. We're off to a good start. Then we waited for the next group to arrive. And we waited. And we waited. And we waited. 9 o'clock came and went. No one else showed up. We shut down our Halloween operation, and we stared in terror at nearly 6 bags of individually wrapped candies that were sitting in our foyer. So part 4 of my story, this is the post-mortem. So what happened? We got all these stories. What happened? We thought we were prepared. Clearly, not all neighborhoods of Las Cruces are alike. Over the ensuing weeks after Halloween, we became more knowledgeable about the different areas of Las Cruces, and clearly our neighborhood in the Pueblos were nothing like Sonoma Ranch and its surrounding area. We're nearly at the very eastern end of North Rise. If you go a quarter mile past the end of our development, you're in the desert. If you drive there today, however, what you'll find, in addition to our development, Sonoma Ranch Elementary School, 2 very large apartment complexes, Sonoma Palms and Sonoma Point, the sprawling and ever-growing single-family development of Sonoma North, hundreds of homes and more under construction. None of what I've described to you existed in October 2008. It was all desert. The Pueblos is a gated community. And without the code, you're not accessing the development by car unless the gates are open for a specific event, and they will open them for events. We have community yard sales. They have open houses for people who are selling their homes. They're also open if we have high winds because it burns out the gate motors. So, but apparently, Halloween didn't qualify. The gates were not open. We have very nice sidewalks throughout the entire facility. We have no street lights, none. And to get to our house on Pickers Court, you're coming off the main road, Namby Arc, to get in. You make a left on Pickers Court. Again, no street lights. You're crossing an arroyo where then you can't even see any house lights. I mean, it's just like pitch black, right? Not the easiest or friendliest foot traffic at night, if you will. And unbeknownst to us, our immediate development in 2008 consisted primarily of retirees without kids. None of our work colleagues from whom we got our pre-Halloween information lived in the Pueblos. And being so new to our development, we didn't know any of our neighbors. So we didn't get any relevant information to what was happening in the past in the Pueblos. The end result was the folks at work got a lot of candy for a long time. It took a long time to dispense because their kids were out and about bringing home hordes of Halloween candy. So it took a while to get rid of it. But we finally dwindled down all the candy without us having to eat it, which is good. There's a moral to the story, all right? It is not what you know, and it is not who you know that matters. It is what who you know knows that makes the difference. We didn't know the right people with the right information for our neighborhood before that first Halloween. We knew better the following year, for sure. That ends Margaret and my Halloween nightmare. Fairly accurate, Margaret? Yeah. I told you it was a horror story like probably none you'd ever heard before.
Thank you, Steve. Really appreciate it. Was hoping for like story of interrogation on a, dark and spooky night or something like that. So our next storyteller comes to us by way of Iowa. But the big country of Texas. Those who live in the big country call it West Texas, but it's really not West Texas at all until you come to El Paso. So here he is, Jason Feltz.
So I have a story, but I also wanted to just share a couple of memories of Halloween. It's funny how your history and times around holidays, for me, and I see it in other people, inform how you raise your kids. Because some of the experiences you had that define you, you want to improve upon those things. But isn't it funny, like how when we look back, we're like, if I didn't have those experiences, I wouldn't have me, and I wouldn't have some of those fond memories. When we were growing up, for a lot of times, it was just me and my brother Joe and my mom, just the three of us for a while. I remember nights like sleeping on the floor in our kitchen with the oven on because we had missed a bill payment and the gas was out, so we just had electricity. So that's how we were staying warm around that. And the reason I think of that is because a lot of Halloweens were, what do we have in the house? And how to make a costume with. And that's what we would do. And one of my favorite memories, and you know what, in Iowa, it didn't matter what the weather was like the day before or the day after, it was always cold and raining every time. And so I remember, and my brother was a vampire because he was the younger one, and we spent the money we had on getting him the makeup and the fangs and his cape, and he had slick back hair. And I was a zombie hunter because we had a camouflaged full suit, and we found a bow, and we were able to make a paper mache arrow that I wore, like I had accidentally shot myself with. Somehow we used some of the leftover paint for my brother, and there was a picture. When we were going through my mom's effects, we found a picture that she had saved of us. And so we just used what we had. And so that was always a defining memory of time with my mom. And so the story I'm going to read right now is probably a story that I associate with my dad and some of the work he did. So here's a memory that I associate with my dad. I was working in the lab late one night when my eyes beheld an eerie sight. For my monster from his slab began to rise, and suddenly, to my surprise, he did the monster mash. It was a graveyard smash. It caught on in a flash. He did the monster mash. From my laboratory in the castle east to my master bedroom where the vampires feast. The ghouls all came from their humble abodes to get a jolt from my electrodes, and they did the monster mash. It was a graveyard smash. It caught on in a flash. They did the monster mash. The zombies were having fun. The party had just begun. The guests included Wolfman, Dracula, and his son. The scene was rockin', all were digging the sounds. Igor on chains, backed by his baying hounds. The coffin bangers were about to arrive with their vocal group, the Crypt Kicker 5. They played the monster mash. It was a graveyard smash. It caught on in a flash. They played the monster mash. Out from his coffin, Drac's voice did ring. It seems he was troubled by just one thing. He opened the lid and shook his fist and said, "Whatever happened to my Transylvania twist?" Well, it's now the mash, and it's a graveyard smash. It caught on in a flash. It's now the monster mash. Now everything's cool. Drac's a part of the band, and my monster mash is the hit of the land. For you, the living, this mash was meant to. When you get to my door, tell them Boris sent you. Then you can mash. You can monster mash. And do my graveyard smash. You'll catch on in a flash. Then you can monster mash. Igor, you impetuous young boy, mash good. Mash good. Thank you.
Mind you, these are all true stories. I have a quick Halloween memory. Growing up in El Paso, we had, there's this thing called the Fiesta de los Flores. There was one big one, but I think there's like now 20 Fiesta de los Flores because like one group got mad at the original Fiesta de los Flores and then they just spawned more Fiestas de los Flores, which is like the party of flowers. And what the Fiesta de los Flores was originally known for was its cakewalk. Do you know what cakewalks are? Like you walk around in a circle and you land on a number and then you get a cake. Well, the cakes that were at the Fiesta de los Flores were like famous. But also were the cakes at the Mesita school, elementary school, Halloween carnival. And so when I was in second grade, I was sitting at lunch with Andy Roth, who I still know to this day, and I was commenting on Andy's hands that he hadn't washed his hands before lunch. And then he took my hand, and he was commenting on how my hands were clean, and then he kind of threw it back at me, and I caught it in my left eye. So I scratched my left eyeball in the second grade. And so was sent to Dr. Nicky's office, and Dr. Nicky took a black light, and he was like, yes, it's scratched. There's nothing we can really do. He put a bunch of goop in it, kind of numbed it, and then put an eye patch on me. And then he decided, well, I'm going to put 2 eye patches on you, and you need to go home and rest for 2 days, and then we'll come back on Monday and see how your eye is. So Trick-or-treating in El Paso was kind of different anyways. It was mostly done by 6 o'clock. You didn't go out past that time after the sun was down. You just didn't. It wasn't really safe to do so. And then there wasn't a whole lot of, like the trick-or-treating experience in your neighborhood wasn't a whole lot of kids in our neighborhood, so we didn't trick-or-treat anyway. But you go to your school's carnival. And so the school that I went to had their carnival on Halloween. Other schools had their carnival like the Saturday before or something like that. And so Masita had theirs on Halloween. And my dad decided to go and maybe buy a tray of gorditas. Have you guys been to Signs Gorditas? If you haven't, you're missing something. I'm telling you that right now. You guys have been? You guys need to go today. So anyways, so my dad was going to get gorditas, and then he got caught up in the cakewalk because he saw a cake that he wanted. And so there's my dad. I'm like 6. My dad's like maybe 45 at this point in time, walking around with a bunch of kids trying to win this cake. And I'm at home with 2 eye patches on, and my dad's wife thought it like really great and a treat to prop me up in front of the TV that I can't watch. All I can do is hear it, which I'm like, at this point, I'm like, can I just go to bed? But I'm hungry because I want a gordita. And my dad's at the thing trying to win a cake. That's my Halloween story, and I'm sticking to it. No, my dad eventually came home with some cold gorditas because he had bought the gorditas before he saw the cake, and then somehow he kind of got stuck going around. Like it was great. It was like in the auditorium, and there was the fishing booth, and he played all the games. So my dad had a great time being a kid again, and I was at home with 2 eye patches. I looked like a little rabbit with ears covering my eyes, and yeah, that was my Halloween. So does anybody else have a Halloween story? The best ones are the most. Carol Tuck. Come in, take the microphone. No, come and take the microphone. You have to share it because we have friends online who can't hear you, Carol. Were you at the last service? Because it was the most boring sermon ever.
I just sent pictures to my younger girl, Julia, I said, Halloween at church, because that's her favorite holiday. And when she and my older girl were little, it was really mostly weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth because they had fantasies of the kind of costumes they make in Hollywood, and I just wasn't up to that. But that was just part of the fun. Now we laugh about it. We weren't laughing then. But Julia has always loved Halloween more than anything. She also was a kid who experienced night terrors, which required some counseling. And she's always loved horror movies, horror stories. And I have a theory that people that do that, it's their way of dealing with scariness. But this is how scary she gets sometimes, is that I always send anything, I send skeletons, pictures and everything to her, anything that's really weird. But she loved this Chainsaw Massacre series. And I'm thinking, Julia, what did I do wrong? She said, Mom, she said, most of the people that got it deserved it. That's my Halloween story. She's a good girl.
I like that explanation of those who suffered night terrors need, like they kind of, well, no, not the deserving part. They get caught up in the horror part, and then the horror part, is their therapy. Kind of a backward kind of. Anybody else have a story? Any story? Yes. You have to come and take the microphone. Because your friend Judy can't hear you if you're talking from back there.
This is a true story, but it's not really. Halloween didn't happen on Halloween, but it's Halloween-ish. My husband and I used to drive around the state selling stuff, and one of our stops was Roswell. But this is not about the aliens. This is a true story about ghosts. We were in a motel, and it had a big courtyard. It was built around a big grass courtyard. So our room is here. And when I was getting ready to go to dinner, he went outside and looked around the courtyard. And the room next to us, he looked in the windows. And he came back to the room where I was, and he said, "Come here, you have to see this." I said, "What?" He said, "Come here, I'm not going to tell you, you just have to come and see it." Okay. So I go outside, and the room next to us, supposedly empty, and he's looking in the windows, and I saw an apparition sitting on the bed. And it was a woman, and she was dressed in like a 1940s suit, and she had a 1940s hairstyle, and she looked really, really sad, really. And I jumped back from the window, like, and he said, "Did you see it?" And I said, "I saw something. What did you see?" I was going to tell him what I saw until he told me what he saw. He saw the same thing. So we went over to the manager of the motel across the courtyard and said, "There's somebody in the room next to us. It's supposed to be empty, but there's somebody in that room. They're sitting on the bed." So the manager came over and went in the room and looked, and there was nothing in there, and there was no depression on the bed. There was no sign that anybody had sat there, had been there. And now he and I are like freaked out. So we go to eat, we come back, and he won't go to bed. He won't lay down and go to bed. I'm tired. We've been working all day, so I lay down, I go to bed. And we had a stun gun in the van. And so he went up to the van and got the stun gun, and he's sitting next to the bed next to me with a stun gun. And I said, "You're going to zap the ghost? What are you going to do?" You know? And that's our true ghost story.
Jimmy Keever, Ghostbuster. I have a story along that line, which was, I come from a family of antique dealers, and the number one thing that antique dealers do is pick. You pick antique stores, or you drive through small towns and you look up and down people's porches or backyards or whatever, and you pick. So my brother was on his way back to Denver, and he was driving at night, and he decided to stop in Springer, New Mexico, and he knew that there was an antique store there, and he thought he would stop and kind of look in the window and see if there was anything, and if there was anything good, he would sleep in his truck and then wait until the store opened the next day and go and buy it. So he's looking in the window, and he's looking at the back and side and whatever, and he's just looking in the window like 10, 15 minutes, and he doesn't realize that right in front of him, well, he did realize, he saw, right in front of him, he thought was a mannequin, and he just was, looking around the mannequin, whatever, and it's, all of a sudden, the mannequin splits apart and turns and looks at him, and he freaks out and jumps back. And what it was the antique dealer and his girlfriend were standing there, not knowing that my brother was looking in, making out, until they stopped kissing. And on that note, Rick Kiley has a story. Can I tell a joke that I told Natalie this morning?
So this story is not really about me. Hi, everybody at home. But in the 1970s, I've almost always worked in the financial services industry. In the 1970s, I worked in for the Prudential, and I was in the pension department, and I provided service for different companies, and one of them was the J. Aaron Coffee Company in New Orleans, Louisiana. I was in New Jersey. And they were my client. And right after Halloween, I had to make a phone call to the company to talk to my contact, Mike. And his secretary answered the phone, and she said, "Mike's not in today." I said, "Oh, is he sick?" She said, "No, actually he has a broken leg." And I said, "Oh dear, how did that happen?" And she said, "Well, I probably shouldn't tell you, but, it was Halloween the other night, and there was trick-or-treating at their house, and it was getting to the point where they were about to shut down, like Steve and Margaret had their time to shut down. And she said, honey, will you take care of the last few? I'm going to go upstairs and get ready for bed. And his wife went upstairs and took off all her clothes and put on a raincoat and went out the back door and came around the front, rang the bell, and when Mike came to the door, she flashed him, and he was so startled that he fell backwards over a table and broke his leg. Good, I got a laugh. I was a little bit afraid. And you know who's laughing the most? My favorite go-to laugher, the Reverend Amy Wilson Feltz. It was worth it.
So this morning we heard a story of how the biggest plans for Halloween can go awry when no guests show up at all whatsoever, and you wondered, where did they go? Like, you're scared as to where they went, and then you find out that you don't know who you should know. And then we find out that we had a story from Jason where Jason tells us about a graveyard smash that caught on in a flash that is known as the Monster Smash. And then I shared a couple stories, and then of course Rick Kiley brings the house down with a trench coat and and Pat Keever, that's right, Pat Keever, the Keevers, Ghostbusters, and sellers of wares extraordinaire. And Carol and the Night Terrors. Carol and the Night Terrors, that's the name of a band. Yes. Sure. Steve is going to close this out. And as Steve comes up, the point of this little, come on up. The point of all this as he comes up is that we can share stories in community in short little bursts and connect really quick with each other. And so here's another instance of how parables works. So Steve Davila for the end.
Yes, I was inspired by the ghost stories that weren't related to Halloween, and this one is not related to Halloween. I think a bunch of you in here know that Margaret and I have a condominium up in Colorado Springs. We spend the summers. I like to golf, and my favorite golf course up there is called Antler Creek. It's in a neighborhood called Meridian Ranch. This story goes back 4 years. I was playing the course. I was walking off of the 6th green. To get to the 7th tee, you go through a long tunnel that goes underneath the road before you can get to the tee box for the next hole. As I was walking off, I looked toward the tunnel. It's a very long tunnel. There were 2 young girls there. I was guessing they were probably middle school age, right? And I said, well, I'm going to have to be careful because I'm driving a cart. It's a very long tunnel. If they go into the tunnel, I have to go very slow. I don't want to hit them. I got in the cart. I looked up. They weren't at the entrance. I said, oh, they must be going through the tunnel because it's very steep. You can't walk up from there. So I was driving, and I got to the tunnel. Nothing. I drove all the way through the tunnel to the other side. Nothing. There was nobody. I thought that was peculiar. Finished the round, went home, and as I thought of it that night, I went and researched Meridian Ranch in the past and missing persons. It turns out 15 years earlier, a 12-year-old girl and a 13-year-old girl had disappeared from Meridian Ranch and were never found. They don't know if they ran away, they were kidnapped, they have no idea. I had never believed in ghosts until I read that. I put that phone down and said, ooh, I may not go back to Antler Creek. That's it, Stuart.
Okay. Well, that's too spooky to end on. So here's my joke. Why don't monsters eat ghosts? Why don't monsters eat ghosts?
Why don't they?
Because they taste like sheet. We'll see you next week for Parables. Peace out.